I'm not entirely sure
Oop,
what's
sorry.
going on there.
So there's the sun.
Seems to be. I don't know how the sun's in my basement, but it sure is kind of acting like it. Um,
Looks pretty. What's your roof? Is that some special roof that you have there, or?
it's funny you asked that. It's actually it's $6 sheets from Walmart that I just put
Oh,
thumbtacks into the ceiling. It's nothing fancy at all. I was actually I was thinking about that when I was like watching a video I'm about to post earlier today, and I was looking at this like black wall over there, and I'm like, it looks like a nice, like freshly painted put up wall. Now it's just a cheap sheet from Walmart.
do you have like some professional light or something for your videos, or it's all just normal lights?
No, not at all. The only semi-professional thing I have is this little mic. I can't get it to work on my laptop, unfortunately. So I hope my audio is fine. But I
Yeah, it's
film
on.
on, I think, an iPhone from 2017 on the front camera with
Hmm.
nothing fancy, nothing special. It's like the lowest budget, most efficient film setup I can do. I'm a busy guy, so I come down here, plan out my video throughout the day, come down here, post it, get it over with. I wish it didn't have to be that way. I wish I could put more time into it, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's kind of just a tip from me for future reference if you ever wanted to like improve on production quality or whatever. I mean, I'm not one to talk because I mean this is pretty much the extent of my production quality as well. Like that's more or less what you see on all my videos. But so I bought like 2 or 3 years ago, I bought a camera, like a Sony something. It was like $700 or something. And the thing is that, and I bought this light that is lighting on me. And this, so there I have another light like this, and the two of them were like $100. And honestly, if I could go back in time, I would not buy a camera. I would just buy the lights, and I don't know, those $700 I would just spend on like drinks or whatever. Because honestly, it's a monumental improvement if you have like stable, consistent, good light, and it's cheap. And honestly, like it's mainly been a barrier, the really fancy camera. So I actually even stopped using it. I'm just recording with my phone these days because the file sizes are just so ginormous with that camera. If nothing else, it's just an inconvenience, honestly. So yeah, for $100 you can make a pretty sizable difference. And yeah, like if you have somewhere to store the light, which doesn't take up that much space, then it's pretty cool. Just random comment.
No, I appreciate it. Any feedback's helpful for me. I'm not a pro at this stuff, as you can probably tell.
um Another thing, I mean, I whatever, like I can consider that a podcast question now, but um I noticed, so you actually inspired me, if I noticed it correctly, that you intentionally kind of have the same outfit in like all videos, all podcast appearances, or maybe you just have a lot of like this kind of a pattern on a lot of your shirts. But did I notice that correctly?
You did. Yeah, I don't think there was one video that I wore just a regular t-shirt for, and that was just because Stan Strength, who's he has a cool channel, he's a good dude, I like him, so I wanted to support him. He dropped a couple t-shirt designs, so I wore one for a Q&A. But other than that, I think I have 115 videos or so, and all but one, yeah, I'm wearing this exact hat. One or two I've worn a different hat, but it's always, this is like my go-to flannel, the cream, green, and tan one. And then I have probably 10 or 12 others. I've been slowly collecting flannels, and it's just what I wear usually anyways, so it kind of fits in with the channel. Just makes me feel like myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And do you also wear the baseball hat usually?
I do. Yeah. So funny story about that is I didn't used to always wear hats, but when I started the channel, I was a couple months into growing my hair out. So I
Hmm.
was like, I can't show this like halfway halfway to the
Yeah.
right hairstyle type hair because it looked kind of funky. So I was like, all right, I'm just gonna wear a hat, and then it kind of just stuck.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's so it, so then you kind of answered it that it makes you feel like yourself. Because honestly, I was thinking that it's a very smart, like marketing move of sorts, or like it helps if a lot of things are consistent about your videos or about your content. Like, that's why they recommend drop your videos at the same time, preferably have a schedule, because like people learn to expect certain things. And I guess it applies to the look as well. Like if you kind of be like a little bit like a cartoon character, like whatever, like Franklin the turtle, like he always wears the same outfit, like whatever, Sandokan the little tiger. I mean, I don't know why these random examples come to mind, but cartoon characters always wear the same stuff, right? So like it helps for recognizability. So I was like, that's a very smart move. I should start doing that as well. So was that
Yeah.
conscious like that in any way?
Yeah, kind of unintentional, but kind of intentional at the same time. I don't think I meant for it to have any like big impact or anything, but I was like, all right, this is just like it's gonna be in a basement. I'm gonna wear flannel. It's just like it's a theme that I kind of like. Um, like it kind of just fell that way. It's funny you mentioned the cartoon characters too, because one of the first comments I ever got on the channel, I think I posted like maybe my third video or something, and the top comment on that video was, "I'm convinced you're a cartoon character because you wear the same thing every day." So when you said
Nice.
like, oh, it gives me that little throwback to last year.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not a cartoon character, but you remind me a little bit of. Have you what? Do you know Skins? The series Skins? No.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I mean you can look it up. It's there's a character in it called Sid, and I mean it's mainly because of the baseball hat. I also think he kind of wears it backwards, and yeah, like the shirt that he's wearing is also a little bit similar. So and he wears glasses. So
Sounds
yeah.
handsome, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess I might as well give a brief intro. People will probably know, but I'm talking with Basement Bodybuilding. And it are you like NH in that your name is not public, or it is
Um,
knowable about you?
I don't purposely keep it private, but I also don't really say my name. Yeah, my name's Landon. I have the channel Basement Bodybuilding. Um,
Random.
some very few people know that. So like occasionally I'll see a comment or it's like great video, Landon, and then
Uh-huh.
it's like once in a blue moon.
Yeah. Okay, that it's good that I asked, because like so you wrote down your name to me once when you messaged me. Maybe we should touch on that little story as well. But for some reason, I remember that your name was Nolan, which I have no idea why. Because I was even gonna make a really cringy joke that like, oh, Nolan, like in the Bible, like Nolan's Ark, right? But
Yeah,
I mean, it's
it
not
would have
that
flown
funny,
over my
but
head. I'm like, what are you talking about?
and then yeah, if I may, like, so actually I've been preparing to make a joke for you if we finally get on a podcast for like a month, and then last couple of days I realized it's actually not at all funny. But so I was just gonna say, so can I call you Basement, or is it Mr. Bodybuilding? That was my big joke. Do you like it?
Basement's probably the go-to. Do people probably refer to me as Basement most often?
Yeah. Oh,
Or
that's actually
BB. That's another one I see all the time.
BB. Yeah, yeah. Big Brother, Basement Bodybuilding. Yeah, it's have you seen the movie Dumb and Dumber?
Maybe once a long time ago. I know I've seen most of it. I don't remember anything about it. Probably 10 years ago or something.
Anyway, like there's a part where so the person's name is Swanson, but the one of the main characters remembers it being Samsonite, and then this man shows up and makes a mess, and then like Mr. Samsonite, this is all a misunderstanding. So I just for some reason I just imagined that like you would get into some mess and a woman would show up, and then someone would think that she's your wife or whatever. It's like Mrs. Bodybuilding, this is all a misunderstanding. Yeah,
I
I
could
have a
see the
lot of time
parallel.
to think about weird shit like this. But uh so all right, so Landon Basement, you started your channel when? Not that crazy long ago, right?
Yeah, it was some point mid February of last year.
Okay. And so now how many subs do you have now? Like it's growing very respectably.
Yeah, approaching on 11K right now.
Very cool. Yeah, it seems like you have found your core audience pretty fast. Like was it Like, do you remember what your first 5 videos got, let's say, for views?
Yeah, I mean the first video, well, technically the second, because I did post a video just called Intro to the Channel, just kind of saying what the purpose of the channel is. But the second video that I posted was kind of like my one of my bigger ideas at the time, which was I can't even remember the title. It was something along the lines of I think it was called The Problem with the Big Three, or The Issue with the Big Three. And I talked about some of the potential programming issues that come with those lifts. And I talked about the mindset that a lot of people go into those lifts with a little bit incorrectly for hypertrophy. And then I talked about uh, artificial progressive overload versus real progressive overload in the video after that. And then I want to say I made one clarifying the difference between isolations and compounds, because I saw a lot of
Mhm.
issues with people misquoting what an isolation lift is. And then other than that, I started to just kind of post there was no like recurring theme, but they were I was just going through my list of topics and my list of ideas. But in terms of like views and whatnot, they kind of picked up pretty quick for like a new YouTuber. I mean, I didn't really expect to get any views at all, but I think it was pretty quickly they were getting 3, 4, 500 views. And then it's been a slow, consistent growth since then. I've never had a viral video, not even close, but it has been a slow, consistent growth, which doesn't seem to be too off pace with how informational YouTube fitness content goes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, I guess if I had to if I had to give someone an idea of what I would say the reoccurring theme is in your videos, and I think that's sort of like a common message that is now being put out by you. NH has a lot of that message. Certainly, it's kind of like one of them would be like putting faith back into natural lifting, and that it's really worth putting thought and effort into it, and letting go of the nihilist mindset. Like, so maybe like that would be one theme, and then the other one would be um yeah, maybe it's actually that, like daring to have the same level of meticulousness and attention to detail as a natural lifter lifting for hypertrophy, as what either a power lifter would have, or what one would think enhanced lifters more justifiably have, because like simply things are just working faster and with greater magnitudes for them. um so something like that. Would you say that's somewhat accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the glaring issue that I've realized, and this is more so since I started my channel, is that you look at professionals in any situation, whether it's a physical endeavor, so like lifting or professional sport, or something like, I don't know, acting, business, crypto trading, like these people that are the best at what they do, it's always the attention to detail. So you go back to someone you mentioned, natural hypertrophy.
Yep.
When you look at his videos, he has far more attention to detail than your kind of like generic run of the mill influencer slash educational type person on YouTube or Instagram. And you always see, oh, this variable, it doesn't really matter. Just do this. Just do this. It's always settling for the just. And that's when lifting starts to become an issue, because when you think that things don't matter, that's when your results will start to slow down, because you have to have attention to detail. And especially in lifting, where it's very finite, that line between making great gains and not making any gains at all. Because if you mess up one thing, if that one thing is something that prevents you from making gains down the line, even if you have everything else in check, your gains can still slow down. So taking that attention to detail and putting it back into lifting, and kind of overcoming that nihilism that gets bred from that, just do this, it doesn't matter, just do that, just focus on this. And that led me down the wrong path, and I gave up on lifting because of it. And then I had this kind of change in mindset. I built out the home gym, and I was like, all right, I just want to do my own thing, start fresh. And that's where everything started to click, and my mindset improved. And sure enough, with my mindset improving, I'm making better gains than I ever have, even though I'm uh, farther down the road farther removed from what we would call noob gains.
Yeah. And you have a couple of videos about this, like about how you started, like mistakes that you have made in the past. And I know that the power building kind of like strength focused approach was something that you were big into at one point, and it was even hard for you to let go of that. You talk about that a fair bit, and I'm not sure. Maybe you have mentioned this as well, but was there a time when this nihilistic mindset appealed to you?
Yeah, it was when I was doing most of that power building stuff, because I kept getting stronger, but I wasn't getting much bigger, and that's when I slowly started to transition to powerlifting, not just to power building, but started to move more further into like specializing in power lifts and that kind of stuff. And that was the point where like I was trying to break like my friends that were training for hypertrophy. I was trying to break them away from that because I was like, well, I'm ahead of you and I know what I'm doing, which I didn't really know that much at the time, ironically. And I would try and sway them away from training for hypertrophy because I was like, well, the gains are just, it's such a diminishing return. Just go train for powerlifting. And that's when I realized that the nihilistic mindset was starting to set in. And I didn't realize that till later, but that's when it did start to set in. And it took me a while to realize that all of my training variables, my programming, and even most importantly, my mindset were skewed so much towards that strength focused side. And I think it gets tricky because strength training with the emphasis on, say, whether it's powerlifting or general strength, focusing on strength or performance to be more general versus hypertrophy, it always gets blurred because we just happen to use the same tools. And I didn't realize that all of my levers were just pushed over to that strength category where I was biasing strength. And for the
Mm-hmm.
longest time, I was like, oh, I'm just genetically gifted for strength. It's all genetics, and I'm genetically shortchanged for size, and there's nothing I can really do about it. And now it's weird because in a lot of key lifts, I'm actually a decent amount weaker than I used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But in the vast majority of lifts, I'm either stronger or more importantly, I'm just better at doing them and I train them harder. I think that's made the biggest difference with that. And that's changed my mindset a lot for the better.
Right. 1 second, just gonna close my Google Chrome windows because might be slowing me down a little bit. Theory, I did it. Cool. so then I would guess that it was like a little bit of a ambivalent state in that you were kind of like nihilistic when it came to what can be achieved by doing more bodybuilding type lifting and what you can achieve in general, maybe muscularly. But I would imagine that if you were into powerlifting, that like that requires quite a bit of attention to detail with programming and everything.
Yeah, so I was starting to go down the rabbit hole of powerlifting programming. Uh, there was one good takeaway from all of this, though, and it's that I still trained my delts and my lats for hypertrophy because I was also caught up in the whole kind of general like aesthetics, and
Mm-hmm.
that type of community where it's just
Of course.
all they care about is kind of the V taper, and that's what I was so focused in on. And the one takeaway that I had, and this is that like hidden gem from that phase of my training, is that looking back at those pictures, my delts and my lats were by far my best muscle groups. And I was like, you know what? It's because I did a little bit more volume there. And it's because I trained them with more isolation with a good mindset. And that's how they ended up getting to grow. So I was like, you know what? By no means was it perfect. It was more along the lines of like the whole just spam lateral raises meme, which is kind of what I was doing. But
Uh-huh.
within that, there are hidden fundamentals that do work. So I probably didn't have to go as high in volume, but the higher volume worked for me and it still works now. And more importantly, I think it's the higher frequency. And then it's a focus on technique too. So under kind of that gray area of the spam lateral raises, I think there is a solid foundation there uh, that I've taken away from it, and that's been a good base for me to push things a little bit further in terms of just how I set up my programs and how I train.
What was that word that you were using? Spam lateral raises?
Yeah, have you never heard that meme? So
No.
there's kind of this meme out there where it will be like an Instagram reel, and it's like how to get big shoulders, and then someone's just like, it doesn't matter, just spam lateral raises. So they're like just doing 1,000 sets a day of lateral raises. They
Okay,
somehow
like spam mail,
yeah,
like
exactly.
yeah. Um, and yeah, it's interesting. So the lateral raises, to me sometimes is almost like the litmus test for seeing how far someone has gone down that power buildery mindset, and that yeah, like that nihilistic mindset as well. Although I would rather actually call it the overzealous minimalist, maybe, which it kind of is problematic. Like some people take this minimalistic approach to training where like, okay, let's 80-20 the whole thing. Like what are those big rocks that are really going to matter? And then it almost becomes this badge of honor for them. Like, how minimalistic can I get? It's like, okay, look, no, like, do you do lateral raises? That's my example always. Like, you ask one of these people, like, wow, damn man, like, you have really good delts. Do you do lateral raises? And they will respond back with this like crying, laughing emoji, like lateral raises, no, like heavy overhead presses. And it's like, dude, come on, seriously, like, you go to the gym like 3 times a week or something, would it really kill you to spend an extra 2 minutes to do a couple of laterals? Like seriously. So and actually I'm talking about like Martin Burkhand, like his camp, which influenced me a lot at a particular point. I think they kind of went down that direction a little bit too much for me. Was that someone that you followed, for instance?
No, I actually don't know who that is. I
Oh
may
no.
have heard you talk about him once or twice in one of your videos, but I don't think I've
Mm.
actually seen any of his stuff. Is he? To me, he sounds like someone that goes way too far into minimalism, and they maybe says that, oh, this is just 80%. So we'll do the 80-20. We'll take 80% of the results for much less of the work, but it turns out to be more of like a 50-50 type of deal.
Yeah, it's so actually maybe if I say lean gains, intermittent fasting, lean gains method, maybe that sounds more familiar. But so he was basically the inventor of intermittent fasting as it's now used by many lifters in the field. So, like 16 hours of fasting, 8-hour feeding window, which is flexible, but like something like that. He made like a really big. He was a big innovator in that he kind of was one of the first people who said that eating every 3 hours is not necessary for building muscle, for example. And then yeah, so he had this article on the internet called "Fuck Arounditis," and it was basically this tome kind of outlining how a ton of people waste their time in the gym, and they just do a bunch of random stuff, and basically they are so ambitious, and they pay so much attention to detail that at the end of it, it actually bites them in the ass. And at the time, I think it was a very useful piece. For me, at least, it came exactly at the time when I really needed that. Because yes, like I think you can definitely do just way too much stuff all at once. You don't really know how to apply it yet. And you kind of just end up wheel spinning. And compared to that, like, yeah, stripping things down to the bare bones is kind of useful. But then there comes a point where if you just keep insisting on like that level of minimalism, it can actually be counterproductive. So yeah, I think that's where him and some of these other people kind of arrived, at least at some point. So, and it's worth reading that article. Otherwise, honestly, it's if nothing else, he's a very good writer. So it's kind of an entertaining read. So yeah. So what were we talking about? Yes. So you were kind of going down in that on that like nihilistic road yourself. So what was the change? Like what were some of the influences that changed that for you?
That brought me out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would say the biggest one for me was Steve Shaw was probably the first person, and he's someone that I've kind of followed forever. He was one of the first people that I started following when I got into working out and everything. He had a video, and it's funny because I disagree with his points in the video, but it was his mindset in this video that made me a little bit more open minded. So it was about bro splits versus frequency training. And he was basically saying that, you know what, like we keep going through these phases where everybody trains with bro splits and we get so dogmatic about bro splits. And then some paper gets written about frequency training. We all just dive right into loving frequency training. The dogma just shifts kind of to the other end of the spectrum. And when he made a video saying it doesn't necessarily matter how you train, just pick things that you enjoy and go train how you want. And at the end of the day, things will kind of even out. I disagree with that, but I think his mindset of the most important thing is enjoying your training and doing what works for you, as simple as that might sound, something that simple helps people in that mindset. So for me, when I had kind of given up on lifting and lost hope, seeing something like, you know what, deep down, I want to go do a bro split. I always have, because as a bodybuilder, and this is before I knew a whole ton about lifting, I knew a decent amount. I had a good physique and I was big and strong and whatever, but I was way, way far off what I could be. And I'm still not obviously at my potential, I don't think, but
Yeah.
seeing that helped a ton. And it made me go start training with a bro split. And that got me back in the gym enjoying my workouts. Was it optimal? No, but I was making some gains. And then once I kind of learned what worked for me and what didn't, that's when that slow refinement came back into play. And then when I experimented with frequency training yet again, which worked for me when I first started lifting, that's when I relearned my love for higher frequency and these programming methods that just work well for muscle building. So that all kind of spiraled into me fixing things up and getting back in the gym. So I definitely have to give a huge shout out to Steve. He's a good lifter, no BS, and I like his mindset too. I would also have to give a shout out to Alpha Destiny. Was huge in helping me kind of think outside the box. And this is through the entire time, from when I first started lifting through when I was power building to bodybuilding. I like the way he thinks, and I admire it a lot and respect it a lot. And then I found Natural Hypertrophy and Jeffrey Verdi Schofield kind of at the same time. I think Steve Shaw gave both of them a shout out or something in a video. And I want to say this is around, it was right when I got the home gym, maybe a month or two after that. So this is like almost 2 years ago. And those guys are great. The way they think, the way they talk, and the way they understand hypertrophy training and kind of fight for it in their own way. And they have that attention to detail that a professional athlete would have about their craft. That was also pretty eye opening for me. So I'd say, yeah, those four guys for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. By the way, for the listeners, he also wanted to say me as an influence, but forgot. Anyway, moving on. Just kidding. No. So the biggest changes that you implemented then was more frequency, and I would imagine also higher volumes. Is
So
that correct? And what else?
before I answer that question, I do
Yeah.
want to say that your videos are great and they have influenced me, because when you
Oh.
made the response video to me about a video that I titled Focus on Volume, Not Progressive Overload, I went down kind of a rabbit hole on your channel. And there was a few
Oh.
videos that really stuck out to me, especially the ones about science and setting up your own training and how to decide and everything. And
Mm.
I think that the biggest takeaway I've had from your channel is it's the ability to kind of get the big picture and your nuance. And that's helped me a lot. And if you actually watch some of my older videos compared to now, I would say you've actually had a legit impact on my nuance. And maybe I used to speak in absolutes before, but I don't as much or at all anymore. So
Oh, thanks, man. That means a
yeah,
lot.
100%. Yeah, no, you have a great channel. I think you're very underrated.
Thank you.
And then yeah, as far as the question you asked about frequency and volume, I would say for me, the highest volumes aren't always the best, but quality volume and then probably increasing it a little bit uh, in terms of that quality volume is going to be key. And then frequency, that's also kind of the secret that's worked really well for me. And I do think frequency is, it's kind of like apples and oranges, but I don't think volume is that useful without frequency. And I know that might not, it doesn't make perfect sense, obviously, because they're, like I said, apples and oranges, but I think frequency is the foundation for volume, if that makes sense.
And do you think, because actually there are multiple lines of thinking on this. So some people say that frequency is great because you can get in more volume, whereas others say that because your volume is higher quality, if you distribute it more, it actually need more need more volume potentially if you train, let's say, with a bro split, like quite infrequently. So what do you think?
Yeah, so I think with bro splits, you probably start to get into junk volume at some point, and obviously it varies from person to person. For myself, I can handle a lot of volume and not have the intensity within that session drop off much. Like if I was to do a back day or something, I could have pretty good performance for a long time with good effort and good proximity to failure.
Mm-hmm.
However, with that, I think I recover quickly too. And I also think I start to regress quickly. So I have to kind of keep going. And if I train a muscle, sometimes even twice a week, the progress isn't that good. So I think one of the benefits of frequency is, yeah, being able to get in sufficient volume. But I also think it's just the amount of times you can kind of target the muscle, let it adapt, and then as quickly as you can, not literally, but as soon as you realistically can within your program, getting in that next session. And you kind of just you build this momentum, which is something I've talked about before, and which I think is actually my worst video because I don't think I articulated it well. But when you build momentum, you have one good session with this lift, and then maybe your Monday session you have a different lift for that muscle, and then you kind of recover in time, and you slowly, it's like building blocks. You're just building this momentum, and I think frequency does a good job of that. And when you kind of find your sweet spot of that mix of volume and frequency, that's when the muscle starts to grow, and the reps that you're doing, they start to add up too. So like if you're doing a set of usually 7 to 9 reps on an easy bar dead stop curl, and your reps start to climb up a little bit, like that's most likely from just quality bicep growth. And I saw that over my last bulk. I don't know if you saw what I posted on Instagram about my physique transformation, more particularly bicep transformation. But I'm like, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it was productive. Like I was sufficiently stimulating my muscles, and that growth, it's like, yeah, when my bicep grows a sixth of an inch or a quarter of an inch, however you want to measure it, yeah, it makes sense that I can probably do a couple more pounds or a couple more reps.
Yeah. Ooh, damn. Oh man, that's pretty nuts. That's a 4-year transformation. Well, a bit
Oh,
less.
so the one next to it. So the one that one's pinned. That's why it's at the top. But yeah, that's a 4-year transformation, or 3.5 or whatever it is. I can't remember.
So this one.
Um, yeah, so that was just from a 3.5 month bulk followed by I think it was a 3 week mini cut that I'm on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the biceps in particular, like for how many years I've been lifting, I think in that short of a time, that's pretty good progress. I mean, it's not revolutionary, but I think if you stick with that style of training over, say, the next 2 3 years, I mean, I think that's the difference between stalling out and like getting my arms maybe up to like 18 inches or something, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It is very noticeable. You have very freaky traps, by the way. Just noticing it. You train your traps a lot.
Actually, not as much as I could or should, because they just weren't as high of a priority. But yeah, as far as trap training goes, it's machine power shrugs. So I have these lever arms, which I can actually just show you right here. So
Mm-hmm.
these lever arms, they come down, they're just pinned up right now.
Yeah.
And what they allow you to do is stand between them so you can use a neutral grip, and just the combination of the weighted stretch, and since it's a machine, you can take it closer to muscular failure rather than technical failure. And those are kind of the big things that I look for in trap training. And even just I'm doing 6 sets a week, and they grew pretty well just because it's a good lift. I don't expect to continue to grow off of that. Like I think if I up the volume and probably the frequency a little bit too, I'm only training them twice a week. I think that's where the gains would probably start to explode a little bit more. So yeah, for 2023, I'm going back to more of emphasizing more muscles than just arms and my quads.
Yeah, I'll definitely want to touch on the specialization aspect of training, because you talked about that a lot, and I think it's very interesting. just to touch on volume a little bit more. So so you mentioned that it's good if you find that kind of momentum that works best for you with frequency and volume. Like, did you have some big trial and error periods with that where like you did way more or way less from each frequency or volume than what now you found to be the kind of like the sweet spot for you?
Yeah. So when I'm doing lower frequency, even if my volume is higher, my gains are less. And I think it's mostly just because the frequency is just not sufficient enough. It's like I'm getting a little stimulus, but there's only so much that volume within one session can do for you. Even if the volume's like quality, there's only so much growth you can net from that one session. So upping the frequency was going to be key for me. I went through a phase in 2021, probably it was maybe around 3 to 4 months where I was doing a lower frequency. It might have been a little long. It might have been 5 or 6 months actually, but
Okay.
I was doing a low frequency bro type split, and I just didn't I didn't make any gains. My arms were the exact same size at the start as the finish, and that's that was kind of unfortunate. So I realized it's one of those things where my exercise selection was good, my technique was good, everything was kind of in check except the frequency. And that's where, like I said earlier at the start of the podcast, if you have one thing that isn't going right, it can kind of throw out everything else being good.
Mm-hmm. And so what would you say now your sweet spot is like? So, for example, how many sets at most per session for a given muscle group?
So at most right now, I would say I think the most I have per session is 4, and that would be for
Mhm.
biceps and triceps. Technically slightly higher for biceps because I do have an easy bar curl at the start of the session with an alternating hammer curl at the end of the session. I just added those in. So if you want to count that as bicep, sure. I don't count it as bicep. I count it more as brachialis, but either way, it kind of
Oh,
hits the bicep. So maybe
okay.
6 there. But for direct work to a muscle, right now I'm at 4 sets. And I do anticipate that to increase because I'm handling it well. I'm recovering fine. And at some point that's probably going to plateau. And I do find that in the longer term, progressing in volume by adding not just going from 10 to 20 sets, but by going from, all right, if I'm doing 3 sets of triceps on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'll go to 3 sets of JM press plus 1 set of overhead extensions on the cable on Monday, and then 3 sets on Wednesday, Friday. And then maybe next week or a couple weeks later, I'll do that extra 1 set of something else on Wednesday, rinse and repeat, and kind of do that on Friday too. So I do anticipate that to eventually those 1 set exercises to maybe go up to 2 sets and then maybe 3. And my workouts will probably be a little bit longer. That's just in the longer term that I can't predict, but I can make an educated guess that I will be closer to 5 or 6 sets per muscle group per session, probably training it 3 times a week, maybe some twice a week.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, I like this because I was not familiar exactly with your kind of preferences with frequency, and I didn't expect that you would say a number that low. Low for most people because like I actually go about pretty similarly. Like for me, traditionally, my preferred number of sets per session is like 2 or 3, and I would rather do more frequency typically. And that has changed a little bit lately, and I'll touch on that in a second why. But then, what would be kind of like the highest frequency that you would use, or maybe what was in the past? Like do you do 5 or 6 sessions even for a muscle group potentially?
No, so that's the one thing I haven't experimented with, and I'm very skeptical of it. I think
Okay.
I do have certain muscles that get somewhat targeted. Maybe like they get hit 5 times a week. Like for back training, I run like an upper lower split where I can't fit my entire back training because it's more than just your back. There's a bunch of different muscles within it. So I'll do like a mid back. So a chest supported row variation on my upper day, which is primarily chest, a little bit of shoulders, mostly arms and forearms focused. And then I'll do more of my lat training on my lower day. There's something I've always liked about doing pull-ups and pull downs with leg training. I don't know what it is. It just works well for me. And then there's a little bit of crossover within that. So when I'm doing some type of row, of course, it hits your lats a little bit. I find that it works, especially with the technique that I use. It's mostly going to be mid back, so like mid lower trap rhomboid region. And then obviously when you're doing some type of pull up, there's always going to be a little bit of trap and rhomboid activation, even if it's not the most direct way to do it. So I have found that is the one kind of way where I target a muscle maybe 5-6 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't found that to do a whole ton in terms of bonus gains. I don't want to write off that method by any means because I don't think I've extensively trained that way, but I am skeptical of going above 3 times a week. I like to have that day of recovery, but not a whole ton more than that.
Okay. So then three times is like kind of your general like highest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seems to be the sweet spot. And I think for myself, and I think for most lifters, like the people that I've worked out with and the people that I've trained, it seems to be the general sweet spot for making gains.
And is that, would you say that that's because of the like just that one day off always in between like hitting it, so you never do back-to-back days?
Yeah, and I think part of it might be mental too. Uh, when you're training a muscle every day, it almost makes it so you allow yourself more room for error in terms of effort levels. So when I found that I was training, I did this little experiment with training shoulders every day or 5 times a week or whatever, but it wasn't enough to actually like record anything or even bring it up aside from this point. But when I was training shoulders and lateral raises 5 times a week, it only lasted for like 3 weeks because I found that when I was doing that and I had so many opportunities to have a good session, I kept saying, oh, whatever. I trained him yesterday. I get to train him tomorrow. And then when that mindset happens every day, now you have 5 unproductive training sessions. And of course, that's something you can overcome. But I do find that kind of gets in the way. And I think when you have not so little opportunities to train a muscle where it's just not sufficient enough in terms of stimulus, but it's not so high to where you're like, oh, it doesn't matter. I can do it better tomorrow or something like that. I think 3 times a week, physically and just mentally, I think it works well.
Yeah, it's so it's interesting because I think I under like I even sympathize, or I actually relate to what you're saying. I have done extensive, but by extensive I mean like year-long phases where I actually trained pretty much every muscle that was important to me, like not 5, like 7 days a week. And the thing is that it went well. In fact, maybe actually like proportionally my best gains I've made during that period on some areas of my body at least. But I've also seen it kind of playing out like how you portrayed it now. And I feel like if something is not going right with you mentally, or maybe there is something that you just don't like about a particular muscle group or training that muscle group, there's always an excuse, or there's always a reason. Like anything could be a good enough reason to kind of slack on your training a little bit. So I could actually make the reverse argument as well. Like if you do like even as moderate of a volume as like 5 or 6 sets per session, that like I can find a reason easily why that would be not productive by the 5th, 6th set, because well, I already did like 3 or 4. I can slack off a little bit. Like, come on, like I put in the work already. So, and you're mentally a little bit, I guess, just more burnt out on hitting that same movement pattern again and again in that session. So that could be a reason. But yeah, very frequent training can be as well. I like for example, with quads, I just got to a point where training it very frequently, I just couldn't be bothered by the end of it. Like serious, like I need to go through the same process of like warming up my knees and my hips and whatever for another like
Sounds
squat
brutal,
pattern.
man.
What was it?
Sounds brutal. Training your quad 7 times a week or even 5 times a week. Like
Yeah,
how do you
it's
program that?
so basically it's enough variety in the type of movement that you do. That's a really big key. Some variety in the rep ranges as well, which, I mean, if you're a pussy like me, in that like I don't enjoy throwing up, then there's a cap on that. So I'm not gonna do like 20 set anything, even leg extensions. So it's kind of like between 5 and maybe 12 reps, like kind of like that's my limit on quads. But it was, yeah, like a typical setup would be something like let's say Smith machine squat, followed by leg extension, followed by leg press. And then I might actually just go back to the Smith machine squats after, but maybe there would be like a fourth movement. And
Interesting.
yeah, and it's sort of like the so with the quads in particular, like the issue for me was that my knees are sensitive. So heavy loading and like really good full range of motion, like a deep knee flexion angle, is going to be tough on it over time. So the fact that I was always fresh for these quad exercises and I could move, like relatively speaking, the heaviest weights that I was capable of, that was actually a negative for me over time. So I could actually benefit from doing, say, more like 6-7 sets per session for the quads. So doing like, okay, like I'm gonna do 3 sets of Smith machine squats, 3 sets of leg extensions, something like that. And then another time that week, I would do like 3 sets of leg presses, 3 sets of leg extensions or something. And then by the end of it, I was fatigued, so I couldn't use very heavy weights on the leg extension, which could be a negative, but in this case, it was a positive for me. So, and yeah, like on some muscle groups, there was just always something that made me feel uneasy. So I loved training my pecs daily. But like, man, like it just gets this massive stretch with these presses. Like, do I
Yeah.
really want to do this on back-to-back days? Like, a little bit iffy, you know?
Yeah. I find that for myself when I've kind of messed around, and I haven't like truly done it, but when I kind of messed around with those higher frequencies, or when I'm doing super high volumes with like kind of a higher intensity too, where I'm like training close to like 2 failure and on a bunch of lifts, I just completely stop feeling that muscle working. And I don't think that mind muscle connection is everything, but I'd get to a point where it's like I would finish some type of like an incline dumbbell press, and I would get up and I'm like, all right, I have zero pump in my chest. I didn't feel anything throughout that set. The only things that I could feel are like kind of my forearms and then just like my wrist and my palm from holding a heavy dumbbell up. And at that point, I was like, yeah, I'm probably not quite recovered, even though like I'm technically kind of progressing and maybe getting a little bit bigger. And this is mostly when I was in that like power building phase where I was going kind of balls to the wall on probably too many of those big lifts. And yeah, I mean, I was progressing, but I don't think I was actually stimulating much in terms of growth. But that's, yeah, kind of my experience with either either too high frequency or too high volumes.
Um, and then when you did, let's say, a bro split, then so I would just kind of logically assume that the sensation side of things was great, like
Yeah,
a full week off, and then you hit it again, like things felt like I'm definitely feeling everything to the max.
100%. Yeah, that was the most intriguing thing about it. And obviously, since then, I've learned that that's not the priority. Like it should be something that you probably feel in your training. It shouldn't take priority over the more important variables like applying actual tension to that muscle. But it's probably not a bad thing to have. And if you have zero of that, it's a good indicator that maybe something is wrong in terms of recovery or just technique. Uh, but yeah, I would handle a lot of good volume, and I think it was all quality volume. But when the frequency is that low, it's just, yeah, kind of defeats the purpose of doing that much volume or anything in the first place.
Hmm. And so so just to go back to your sweet spots for a second. So I know that, for example, arm training is a big priority. So I would guess that the volume on those is a bit higher than on other muscles, most other muscles. So, but if you do like typically 4 sets at most per session and like 3 times a week, then like you would typically cap out at like 12-ish sets per week.
Yeah, 12 sets right now a week. Yeah, that's spot on, actually.
Uh-huh.
I do anticipate it to go up, like I said. And then the other muscle groups that I have are at what I would call like a maintenance volume. Like I'm starting to kind of realize that 6 total sets a week for my quads, or even 8, isn't quite enough. Like maybe I could get away with 9 sets if I did 3 sets 3 times a week. Like if I was doing plat squats and hack squats and walking lunges or something. If I was doing that 3 times a week, that frequency might override lower volume. But I don't think with a moderate frequency, so I'm doing twice a week for legs, that's where I think I do have to do a little bit more volume than just 3 or 4 sets a session to actually see growth.
Mm.
Yeah, when I train a muscle 3 times a week, it works well. It lets you kind of get in the groove and get that momentum going.
Right. And then do you typically do like one exercise or two? Like let's say you do 4 sets for your arms, or any muscle group. Like do you, yeah, 1 or 2 lifts or 3 or whatever?
Yeah, it depends on the frequency. So if I'm hitting a muscle 3 times a week, a lot of the time I can get away with just doing one lift that day. So 3 sets. So like for my bicep training, it's Monday is dead stop easy bar curls. Wednesday is a close grip regular tempo easy bar curl. And then Friday is a dead stop barbell curl. And that's been fine. So if one lift, just 3 sets of that works because I'm doing the higher frequency. If I was doing that twice a week, probably not so much. I'd probably have to add in a second lift per day. So like for my quad training, for example, I was doing 3 sets of plat squats followed by one like all out set of leg press. And then on my second day of quad training in the week, I would do again 3 sets of plat squats, same technique, same rep range and everything, followed by one set of like a lower stance, like hack squat style leg press, if that makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to twice a week, I'll usually do 2 lifts in that day, somewhere between 4 to 6 total sets. And then 3 times a week, some muscles I can get away with just doing one lift, 3 sets for. If I'm truly trying to maximize growth, it probably has to be four to 6 total sets. 3 times a week, four I can probably get away with. If it's twice a week, I probably have to go a little closer to 6 total sets. So I'd say the sweet spot for me in terms of volume, probably between, if I'm optimizing everything and I have all the time in the world and I want to make everything as perfect as I possibly can, it's probably 12 to 16 or 12 to 18 sets per week per muscle group. But that is pretty difficult to actually fit in for every muscle group. So some stuff just naturally has to go on maintenance. Like I haven't been training my calves, my hamstrings, glutes, like those muscles just haven't been touched because I have to prioritize that time and energy and even mental focus towards the more important muscle groups that are getting that maybe 12 to 16 sets a week range.
Right, right. By the way, are you pressed for time? Like, when do you need to jump roughly at
No,
most? Just
Sundays are my day off, so I'll do, yeah,
oh,
I'll do a little bit of work and whatnot, but I'm kind of just chilling on Sundays.
cool. Then okay, then we have 6 more hours to go. Just kidding.
Yeah,
Um,
which lets you do that.
yeah, well, I mean, gotta hit my personal record on this one time as well. So, no, but so then, for example, you do. So I would guess that like 3-ish sets. So if you do like, let's say 4 sets for a muscle group in a session, then you might only do one lift. If you do more like 6, then it's gonna be at least 2. Is that?
So that's a good question. I do cap things out at 3 sets per lift. I find that once I get creeping into that 4, 5, even 6 sets per lift, That's another situation similar to that frequency situation where I was saying if you're doing something so often, you're more likely to half-ass it. I find
Mm-hmm.
it's the same thing with sets in a given session. So I do cap it off at 3 because that gets me training higher quality. And when I only have 3 sets or even 2 sets or 1 set, it's going to be all out. And I think it's more of a mental thing than anything. But when I'm doing 4 sets, the first set might be more like a warm up, or the fourth set might
Mm-hmm.
just be too low of an intensity from hitting so much before. So 3 sets is the key. And then when I add in new lifts, I'll add in one set of that new lift, and then over time slowly start to build those up. So my volume on Monday goes up to 2 sets for that lift, then Wednesday goes up, then Friday goes up. And we'll kind of just rinse and repeat. So you're slowly stacking on top of each other and the volume increases. And then I can probably keep going in volume forever, but by the time my volume gets that high, I probably have a change in goals where it's like, all right, well, shit, my arms are pretty big now. Let's move the arms back to maintenance and then slowly rinse and repeat that same long-term volume progression with whatever my priority is at the moment. So when you look at my training, um, I might make a video on my program actually, just to kind of clarify a lot of things. But you'll see, yeah, 3 sets tops. And if I'm doing, when you look at my volume chart, you can tell how many lifts I'm doing for that muscle group throughout the week just by how many sets are there because of the way I structure it. So if I have 6 total sets, you know that's going to be 2 lifts.
Mm-hmm.
That's for example.
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually, we do this very similarly then. I've heard this from other lifters, so it's just interesting to see how psychologically there's just something at a certain point. It's really hard to not get into that zone where you're just kind of going through the motions. And honestly, like my preference would be to just do 2 sets on everything always, and I would rather do another exercise at that point. Like there is a difference, even though like, yeah, okay, biceps, chest, but like still like just to be able to change up the setup a little bit and do something else. Like I don't know why, but it just matters even at home. So I don't have a setup as cool as yours, but I have this cable, like this functional trainer, and I actually do a lot of lifts on that. And even there, like just changing the angle of the bench and do like a more inclined movement or a more like a flat press, even that matters, let alone in an actual gym where like, okay, I have to sit here on this machine still, other than just walking over to the other end of the gym a little bit. So yeah, like four sets would be the absolute max I would do, but typically 3. And if I can really do things according to my preference, like there is enough movement variety even available, then yeah, 2 sets would be fantastic.
It's funny.
So go on.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you say that because I have a very similar experience with that. So within a session, let's say I'm doing I don't know, an incline dumbbell bench press. By the time I get to my say 4th set on that, that movement's kind of fried. Like I'm not really feeling anything work, which like I said earlier, it's not the most important thing, but my performance is going down. Like the movement pattern just feels fried. But if I was to go to say like I'm sitting on my flat plate loaded chest press right now, if I
Mm-hmm.
was to go to that, my performance would actually be like sufficient, like the intensity would be good enough for me to actually continue to get stimulus from it. So that's where I do agree with you that if I was to do 6 total sets of barbell curls, they would probably stop being effective after the 3rd set, maybe the 4th set, and it would that you'd see the actual stimulus and benefit go down pretty significantly. But if I was to do 2 sets of barbell curls, 2 sets of dumbbell curls, and then 2 sets of like a cable curl, that's probably a much higher quality 6 total sets there. So when you're getting into these higher volumes, in my experience, I found that you do need a little bit more variety. You can't just keep milking the same lift because then the volume starts to get a little bit redundant and it would be, as most of us would refer to as junk volume. It sounds like you have a pretty similar experience, huh?
Yeah, exactly. It's yeah, like, and those are the times when I just sometimes get stuck in a rut where I do too much volume. Would kind of agree with you, sometimes also too much frequency, but yeah, like just get into that zone where I just feel like I'm just performing sets, but really like my mindset is more like, okay, I just want to get this done finally. Like I can't wait until this is done. And honestly, for me, like that little bit of a mental edge, that can really make the difference for me between having a phase of training that I can look back on and say, okay, this was very productive, versus like, well, yeah, I've been doing a lot of work, but I'm honestly not. I don't really know what to show for. And that's also like in weekly set volume. So like I kind of always find that like that 15-ish sets per week, like that's where I can go over that, but either because I actually just don't recover quite as effectively, or maybe because of that lack of focus, that's where it just seems to get sloppy all the time. Do you have that also with like a certain like weekly set number that you found?
Yeah, so I think I haven't gone high enough in volume to where that does make a big difference. The only time I've gone that high in volume is on purely isolation lifts. So like when I was training my shoulders super high volume, it was just lateral raises and face pulls and variations of that. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I could do so much volume, but either way, it's like once you get that maximum stimulus from the session, that junk volume, it probably the only way it's hurting you is probably just through being a waste of time more than impacting your recovery. So when I was doing that, did I need to do 45 or 50 sets a week, like literally, which is insanity to look back on? Probably not. I probably could have done 30 and gotten the same results, but it didn't hurt me. So that's why I kept doing it. It ultimately it worked. And I don't know where the diminishing returns came from because it was such an extreme jump in volume, which is kind of different from my philosophy now. But when you look at that training from maybe someone that's more intermediate to where I'm probably, and these are so vague, but probably creeping up more towards that like later intermediate where volume, even on an isolation lift, is a little bit more fatiguing, even like in like a systemic sense, because you're just recruiting that much more out of that lift. Versus like, let's say a beginner takes a lift to failure, they're ready to go again 30 seconds later. But it's obviously someone like me or you, where we've been lifting for our fair share of time. We know how to get the most out of a set, and that's where there could be benefit from even going a little bit lower in volume than you were at before.
Yeah. And so, well, okay. So, okay, two topics that I definitely want to discuss. One is like the specialization phase aspect of things. The other one is related to kind of progression. So your preferred rep goal system, or how to look at progressive overload. Which one do you think is more appropriate to continue with from here?
Let's go into the let's go into the specialization. I feel like we're kind of finishing up on the frequency, volume, and specialization. So I think
Mm-hmm.
this is a finishing topic to this portion. So
Perfect.
as far as specialization goes, I think the biggest key here is starting with your priorities and then experimenting from there. So what are your true desires in terms of bodybuilding? Are you looking to grow biceps, rear delts, glutes, quads, calves? Like, what is it? Pick a couple of those muscle groups and isolate them without the rest of the program first, and then try putting them together and see how that goes. You might have to change a couple things, and then just probably put everything else at maybe like a maintenance. Depends where you're at. It's impossible to prescribe this to everybody, but just to I'm going to reference myself because maybe some people can relate to me here. I'd say, all right, well, biceps and triceps and forearms are my highest priority. I didn't focus enough on my arms for the past few years, so this is what I'm focusing on now. I said, all right, in isolation, as in not isolation lifts, but take the rest of the program and put a blanket over it. What is the best protocol if I was to only go into the gym and train biceps? What is the best way for me to get big biceps based on what I know other people have done and what's worked for me in the past. And in theory, what makes the most sense. And I'll start with that. And I'll say, all right, that's the bicep training. Put a blanket over that. What about triceps? Rinse and repeat. What about forearms? Any other areas of focus that I have for that training phase? And then everything else, just put on maintenance volume, maintenance frequencies. So maybe twice a week, 3 sets per day, 6 total sets a week. You're probably not going to lose a whole ton of muscle. You might not gain a whole ton doing that. Obviously, that varies from person to person, but for myself, probably wouldn't work. From there, I'll see how that training's going. And then if I want to try specializing in, say, another muscle group, then I'll maybe add something else in. So that kind of happened with my arm specialization is I slowly started to add in more quad training and slowly bump up my quad volume from there. I've bumped it back down just a tad bit on my mini cut because it was just too exhausting for me because I'm just not eating enough. I'm doing a rather aggressive one. So I bumped it down a set, but that's generally how I'd go into my mindset with specialization.
Okay, so then maybe you mentioned this, but like, what would be the most, like the highest number of muscle groups that you think you could like really focus on at once in a
Yeah, I
phase?
think I think at once, and it's gonna be a spectrum because if I was just gonna disregard everything except for biceps, I think that would be the best way to get bigger biceps. But obviously that's
Uh-huh.
not realistic because then I'd just be playing catch up with everything.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the muscle group and if it's targeted best through more systemically fatiguing lifts or through isolation lifts. So I think for lifts that are best targeted through isolation lifts, you can specialize in more of those. So like if you want to do side delts, rear delts, bicep, tricep, forearm, calves, like you can giant set those with not much rest in between sets, and you can train them with a super good proximity to failure with high frequency and high volume. It
Yeah.
doesn't take that much time. Like it's painful, but it's only local fatigue that you recover from pretty quickly, and it's painful in the moment, but you just kind of have to tough through that. When it comes to adding in muscles like your traps, glutes, quads, hamstrings, that's where that energy starts to probably take away from other muscle groups. So I think you can specialize in a lot, but the more you try and specialize in, especially the bigger muscle groups, that's where maybe the specialization is a little bit less of a specialization, more of just a prioritization, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And so you have mentioned like having arm days, um if you, for example, want to specialize on arms, which well, okay, I'll have something to say on that in a second. But so do you do that current, because you mentioned that you do an upper lower, so do you do that plus an arm day here and there, or how do you do it?
No, so right now I'm just on. It's a 5 day split, so it's three uppers, and then there's two lowers just sandwiched in the middle there. So it goes upper lower upper lower upper, and I don't have an arm day. The reason for that is because the torso training that I'm doing, so like chest, shoulders, and whatever muscles of the back I'm training on my upper days, it's on maintenance volume. So I'm simply just not fatigued enough to actually have it affect my arm training versus take a push pull legs approach where you're doing like a little bit less frequency because you're only training each muscle twice a week. But let's say your push day is 5 sets on bench press, followed by 3 sets of incline dumbbell press, then a couple sets of military press, lateral raises, and then you're just getting into your tricep training. That's going to be completely ineffective tricep training because you're fatigued mentally, and then physically your triceps have taken a little bit of a hit, not enough to actually stimulate growth because I don't think they've been trained directly in a good range of motion or proximity to failure. But they're fatigued enough to where the intensity of your tricep training combined with a lack of mental focus because you're just in the gym for an hour and a half already, that's where the tricep training becomes ineffective. But on a higher frequency, especially with the bigger muscle groups on more of like a maintenance volume, like I can do a few sets of say weighted dips or a machine press or an incline barbell bench, and then still train my triceps and biceps pretty optimally after that. So I don't think an arm day for myself is entirely necessary because of the situation I'm in terms of specialization and volume and whatnot. But I think for a lot of people, you can have an effective arm day, especially with upper lowers, it works really well. Or even with a full body system where you're training, say, every muscle 3 times a week, and then you throw in a fourth day that's just an arm specialization. So I do highly recommend it for people. Just for myself, with where I'm at right now, I don't need it, but that's not to say I wouldn't use it in the future.
Yeah, it's so what would be on an upper lower split for you now on your upper body days? What would be your kind of exercise sequencing? Because like you have your torso and your arms, so I'm assuming you start with an arm movement, but like how would it roughly look like for you?
Yeah, so it starts with torso, and the usual template that I would use is some type of chest, a compound lift for my chest paired up with an isolation for my biceps. And then after that, it would usually be some type of row. So whether it's like a one arm dumbbell row or a machine row or a cable row paired up with something for the triceps. So say weighted dips paired up with a dead stop easy bar curl for the first superset to open the session. After that, it would be, say, a one arm dumbbell row paired up with a JM press. And then after that, it would probably be whatever else I need to do for arms. So maybe like one set of overhead tricep extensions. And then it would be maybe one set of like an alternating hammer curl to get the brachialis a little bit. And then it would be unilateral forearm training after that is what I'll typically do. So I'll do like a stretched wrist curl, which I don't know if I made this lift up, or I'm sure some arm wrestler out there in Europe
Mm.
or something has invented this before, but it's like a stretched wrist curl where I lower the dumbbell to my hand, curl up, and then wrist curl from here. So I'll do that, alternate sides for 2 sets each, and then I'll do one set as like a finisher for forearms, where I'll just grab that dumbbell and do standing finger curls on my right side till failure, and then left side till failure. That's like a very general kind of template of what I'm at from there. And then in the future, that would probably look more like I would do one lift of 3 sets for each muscle group. And then every muscle would probably start at some point having one set of something else. So it'd be 3 sets of dips, followed by one set of a machine chest press. And then I'd slowly progress that second lift up to maybe 2 or 3 sets.
Right, right. Um, yeah, so it's interesting because so one thing I wanted to say is that you NH as well, and then you yourself. Honestly, it's been very inspiring for me to hear just the way you talk about arm training, because like it's either one of those things that people talk about as like an afterthought, or it's almost like it's almost cool to not think much about arm training because it's such a bro thing to do,
Yeah,
right? Like you're
spot on,
training,
man.
yeah, like a real sophisticated like but dedicated trainer is like, like a focus on like back and whatever, or like lower body. That's the most noble thing I guess you can do. Yeah. And then like arms is like, nah, come on, like do you want to be like any like random bro who's taking up the cable stack in the gym for an hour with like 15 different curl variations? And it's very refreshing, someone kind of like giving it the respect that it deserves, I guess. um and also like you made some points which really forced me to think about how I should go about arm training if I really wanted to give an honest go to bringing up my arms. Because like that was for me, my arms are like, it was always a good muscle group in that like I think it looks good, like it just has like a decent attachment, or whatever. Like so my biceps always look bigger than what they are, just I guess like I have a relatively short muscle belly, so the peak is like a little bit higher, but it was never a particularly big, like in terms of absolute numbers. Even my calves were bigger for a long time than my arms, which is kind of rare. Um, and the thing is that like if I wanted to go about it in the most evidence-based way possible, and the way I generally like to go about training muscle groups that I want to bring up, I would have done high frequency, maybe like 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week, right? Then like 2 sets or whatever, something like that, 2, 3 sets every session. But the thing is that like if I do an upper body day, I'm I just have a really, really hard time mentally putting arm exercises in the beginning of the session. Because like, yeah, it's going to compromise my pulls and my presses to an extent if I do bicep and tricep work there. So then I would do it later in the session. But if I do it later in the session, what would always happen is that I would just skip them. So I actually started doing like pretty legit arm days where I actually don't even really train much else. And I kind of just do like torso day, arm day, back and forth.
Yeah.
In my case, it helps that I legit turn into a complete bro, and I actually just skip leg day now completely and done it for the past like 3 months. But yeah, it's so I do like 4 to 6 sets basically every other day. Maybe I still sprinkle in something on the in-between days. And yeah, like this has been the first ever time in my life where I did consistently higher volumes. And it doesn't seem like I don't feel like, man, I can do this for another week, but not after, because this is just bullshit. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. So first off, I do want to thank you uh, for that. That's one of the best compliments I could hear, is that I have helped inspire you in terms of arm training, because
mm-hmm.
it holds a special place in me, because I used to be so far to the other side of the spectrum, because I let other people's what they'd say about arm training completely affect me. So when I first got into the gym, and I think most people are like this. And you had a great point about, oh, I focus mostly on legs. It's the most noble, right?
Yeah.
So when I first got into the gym, it's arms. Like, what 17-year-old kid wants big hamstrings, you know? Like, I wanted to get big arms. When you first started lifting, what was your innate desire in terms of what muscle groups you wanted to grow specifically?
Yeah, I would say chest and arms,
Yeah,
maybe
and I think
shoulders a little bit. Yeah.
it's probably safe to say that most people are like that. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, right. So I guess the thing is like, how do people keep ending up? Even people like myself, like, how did I go from a complete bro that just wants bigger arms to someone that frowns upon arm training? And even like, yeah, I used to make these posts on Instagram. Like, I'd put a video up of me training arms and be like, oh, rare sighting of me training arms. And I would just like kind of mock it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what happens when you start to focus so much on the lift rather than the muscle group, because people bias the big hitters, the big lifts. So they always, and it makes sense in a programming way. But when you look at it, it's so over biased, and you have all these big movements at the start, which obviously target the bigger muscles. And that's when you start to look probably more like a power lifter's physique, because the muscles that are targeted through lifts that people don't want to put at the start of the workout, they get neglected. So what helped me, and I think the ultimate example of this, is when you look at arm wrestlers, and I don't know much about them, so I only have a little glimpse into how they train, but from what I've seen, they know how to go in and perfect their craft. So when arm wrestlers are training in the gym, they treat their like whatever variation of like pronation wrist curls that they do the same exact way a professional powerlifter treats his low bar squat. And that is the mindset that I think we need to get back to. And that's why I'm such a huge proponent of isolation lifts and saying, okay, well, yeah, why are you focusing more on squats than wrist curls? And when you look at it in the sense of the lift, like, yeah, it makes sense. The squats target more muscles and they target bigger muscles. But when you look at your physique, I mean, you said this. You said you skip leg day now, and you're focusing mostly on arms. So yeah, are your quads a bigger muscle group than your forearms? Yeah, I mean, obviously. But what's more important for your physique? Lifts aside, don't look at the lifts that target those muscles. When it comes to your physique, what is more important? And I have a hard time saying that my big hamstrings, that are a larger muscle in most of our bodies, is more important than your forearms.
Yeah.
So why should an RDL take precedence over something as simple as a stretched wrist curl, right? Like that's just the way I see it, and that's shift of my mindset that started off great and then got brainwashed, and that's the bounce back from that kind of nihilistic mindset. So yeah, when you talked about that and you brought that up, I think that's something I can relate to. And where you are now is I've been in your exact shoes.
Yeah. It's by the way, just for listeners, like if anybody's confused, because I just had a video last week on like my extremely high back volumes. That video I actually recorded at the end of November. So actually, like that's like the past month I've been, well, not the past month, past, yeah, 2-3 weeks. Like that was just the end of my high volume back phase, and I was like, okay, let's finally give it a go. Like, can I get these arms close to like 17 inches? Which, I mean, now I am, because like I'm fat, and so it was always like went up to like 16 inches before when I was fat. Now I am again, but it's closer to 17. So there is an improvement. But maybe actually I can ask you that because you have more experience with this. Like when you bulk up and you also train your arms a fair bit, you manage to bring it up to an extent. Like how much do you tend to keep if you then cut back down?
So this is one that I actually don't have an answer for because I don't cut enough. So what I'll typically
Oh, yeah.
do is I've only done two like actual cuts. And the second one I'm only like halfway through right now. So I did one like extreme cut, probably down to like 10% body fat back in 2019. And I didn't measure any of my muscle groups because back then I was just too focused on power building.
Mm.
But now that I'm here, I'm down. I haven't compared the actual numbers yet because the cut's not complete, but I do know that when you compare the body weights, right now I'm at the basically, if you look at that post that I posted on Instagram, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I'm the same body weight in both of those pictures of the like the bicep most muscular shot.
Mm-hmm.
So they're both like 183 pounds or 184, whatever it is. I can't remember the exact number, but uh, I can't remember what the measurement is, partly because I haven't taken them yet. But you can clearly see the difference in the muscles. So that's after a 3.5 month bulk, followed by a 3 week cut to just shed the fat. So that
Yeah.
was the net gains of a 3.5 month bulk, and that's why I'm so hopeful for the next few years because bodybuilding's it's just time. It's the accumulation of volume and like yeah, just sets over time. So if that's what can be done in 3 months, I'm not saying I can replicate that every 3 months, but if I can get close to that, or anyone can get close to that over the course of 3 years, I mean that's how 18-inch arms are made.
Yeah. Yeah. And you, so maybe you just mentioned the numbers now, but I was like, just thinking in my head a little bit. So you, like, do you know, let's say in the past like 2-3 years, like you have been lifting seriously already, but then you started focusing more on your arms, like how much growth you netted like over years at this point?
Yeah. Yeah. So my arms peaked out at 15 and 3/4 when I was power building. And I did measure them one time. They were, yeah, it was 15 and 3/4. They were almost 16 inches. And this is when I was benching 330 with a solid pause. Like I wasn't weak by any means. I just, my exercise selection was way off. And then I got them back to 16 point or not 16, 15.75 back in around like the springtime of 2021. And I've got
Nice.
them up to a little bit over 16 and 3/4. So they're like kind of approaching 17. My I don't know if you saw my goals for 2023 video, but
Yeah.
I want to get 17.5 inch arms this year, probably maybe around upper 180s, 190 or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. I like that because it seems like we had a pretty similar kind of initial endpoint with our arm growth, with more like compound focused lifting. And then if that's what you were able to do, I if I could do that myself, I would be actually very happy with that. But yeah, I actually like a lot. So you mentioned how, of course, your arms, you're going to notice that a lot more. And that's what you were in for to begin with. Like that's what inspired you in the beginning. And that's going to be the case for most. And I actually, I like Alpha Destiny's approach a lot in that, especially earlier on. I think he was a little bit bigger on that, but I think it's a good just mindset to have, or useful thought exercise. Like, okay, like what are going to be those main points on your physique that are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck? Like clothed, yeah, it's going to be arms. I mean, it depends on what you're wearing. If you're wearing a short sleeve something, then arms, forearms for sure. And then yeah, like I guess like shoulders, like, so I guess like how much of a V taper you have, that's always going to be helpful, but like maybe a bit more so if you're wearing like something long sleeve. So that's a useful thing. Like, okay, probably working on your back and on your delts is going to be useful always. But then yeah, like the arms are always one of the first things you look at. And now that I think of it, actually recently I did some measurements with a guy in the gym, and so the guy in a t-shirt looks like a monster, like like a different species than I am, seriously. And I was like, sorry, like do you know your measurements, like arms, shoulders, whatever? And so his arms, I think, with a pump, they are like 50 centimeters. So what it like, it's a bit less than 20 inches, I think.
Okay, yeah,
So
it's huge.
yeah. And cooled, it was 18. So I think that's 45 centimeters. It's 45 centimeters. So whatever that is in inches. So that's really big. But again, so with a pump, it's 20. So like as soon as he picks up a dumbbell, he just has these ginormous arms. And I was shocked that when we measured our chests, I think mine was a bit bigger. And I couldn't believe that was true, but it's, well, because the arms basically set the tone for everything else. Like if someone has arms that big, the entire person seems like a muscle monster. So it's definitely a pretty important area to focus on, I would say.
Yeah. I would say arm dominant lifters. So the people that have, say, and kind of like a muscular but nothing special torso that have giant arms look more jacked, and I think they look better than anyone else in that's torso dominant. So I think you take I think Jeffrey Verity Schofield's the perfect example. Obviously his back and his chest are fucking jacked, but
Yeah.
let's be real, his arms are on another level. His arms are way ahead of his torso. I think he's definitely arm dominant because he trained his arms so hard. So I think that's the secret to having a good physique like that. And I think you get so many people that are so caught up in the V taper, which I'm not completely sold on. Like, I don't think that's the highest priority. Like, I get that it's important, uh, but I think too many people focus on lats and delts, where of course it's important. But when you look at arms and especially forearms, like if you want a V taper, like your arms are kind of what's hanging next to your waist. So if you have like a big thick arm next to your waist, the ratios and the circumferences make your waist look a little bit smaller. And then, yeah, I mean, you can still train your lats and shoulders. Like, of course, that's important, but you can have big lats and shoulders. But when you have these tiny little arms dangling off of you, like it's not going to make your V taper look that good. So I think arms are super underrated. And that's a video topic that I came up with the other day that I do want to expand on a little bit more, just in terms of proportions and the importance of actually developing your arms and your forearms for even a V taper, which kind of sounds counterintuitive, but I think it works.
Yeah, I actually think that the lats are kind of like one of the, so one of the, I was going to say one of the most overrated muscle groups, which does not mean that they are not important. So something can be important and still overrated. Because like, even if we just look at the back, I think there are like so many areas of the back that are at least as important as the lats, like upper back, like spinal erectors. Like if you look at someone from the back, like those are gonna be one of the first things you notice. And lats, I don't know, like I feel like they're almost more important from the front. So like if you see those kind of wings in between your arms and your torso, then that looks very cool. But yeah, from the back, like I think kind of lats are overrated. I don't know if
Yeah,
you
because
agree with it.
when you're just standing still, they kind of can disappear. And this is
Yeah.
like I'm someone where I specialized in lats. And my lats were huge back when I was doing that power building phase because I isolated them, and not necessarily just I did a bunch of pullovers, but I did all sorts of pull up variations, lat pull down variations with good mechanics, insane effort, volume, and proximity to failure. Same with delts, and it's like, yeah, I mean, as big as my lats were, like my physique didn't look right because my arms were too small. So when you can keep specializing in a muscle group, but if you have these lagging areas, it's like just having one freaky muscle group isn't going to do a whole ton to make you look jacked. I talked about that a while ago, where it's like when you look at my physique, I think I look bigger than I am because I don't have any weaknesses. Like I'm pretty proportionate. I mean, obviously, like, yeah, my calves and abs suck, so someone can call me out about that. That's totally fine. But like my forearms, biceps, triceps, pretty good traps and lats. Like there's no glaring weakness on the physique, and that allows me to not have 18-inch arms yet, but still look bigger than I probably am. And that's where kind of the illusion of bodybuilding starts to take place. And kind of, not that I don't want to say it's just an illusion. It's like an art form in a sense, as cliche as that is.
Yeah. No, but it's a good cliche because it's true. But do you have a bit more time to talk about the progression side of things, or you're
Yeah,
getting
I got all
hungry?
day,
Or
man. So if you want to take 2 hours or so for the podcast, yeah, I'm cool with it.
oh, cool. Well, I'll try to not take up that much of your time, but thank you
Whatever's
for
best
giving
for
me
you.
the permission in any case. um, so you talked about the way of facilitating progression or progression scheme that you like. So it's if I recall correctly, that's also from Steve Shaw, the rep goal system.
Yeah, the rep goal system. So it's just it's in the big picture, double progression, but the rep goal system in particular, I like because you can't sandbag any sets. So I know a lot of times with double progression, you'll see people do like, all right, well, I'm going to do an 8 to 10 or an 8 to 12 rep range. So they'll start off with a weight and they say they're getting 988 or 987, and they're slowly working their way up. Eventually that turns into, all right, the goal is 12, 12, 12, and then I'll add weight. I think that starts to get to be an issue where you save energy on the first two sets just for the sake of getting the third set up to 12, just like an arbitrary number,
Yeah.
versus the rep goal system where you total your sets into one specific goal. That's where you allow for that kind of natural attrition within set to set from having a consistent proximity to failure. So you're consistently training with the same effort and reps in reserve, or however you like to judge that. Um, and that allows you to maximize stimulus and not get in any junk volume and sandbag your stuff. So that's essentially the what I do, and the reason why I do it in a vague sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's good that you started with holding back in earlier sets to save yourself up for later sets theme, because actually that's exactly the reason why I don't like, as a default method at least, the multi-set progression scheme. So like 3 sets of whatever. But I was under the impression that like that could be an issue still with the rep goal system. Like I understand that it's not as likely because every set counts towards the final output or the final like total accumulated rep number that you're looking at, but you don't have it at all when you're doing this. That like, okay, so cool, I got more reps in the first set, that's good, that counts towards the latter sets, but like I still need to be able to perform in the final sets. You don't have that to an extent?
No, because with I judge my sets based on a proximity to failure, and the reps are, as long as I'm within a good range, which is predetermined from the rep range I work in across the 3 sets. So say I'm doing a close grip easy bar curl for 3 sets, range is 25 to 30. So when I hit 30 reps, that's a rep range that I start to maybe not like to get into as much. Like maybe I don't like to get 13 or 14 reps on my first set and start to average above 30 total. It kind of keeps me in check, where once I hit the rep goal, it's mostly just one, it's accountability for actually adding reps and training hard enough to add those reps. But it's also something that kind of keeps me in check where I can cycle through certain intensities. So obviously, you can keep adding reps, but at some point the intensity just gets so low that you stop getting stimulus. You start to fail from other ways. So whether it's just because it hurts, or it's you give up, or you get out of breath, or whatever happens, it just kind of keeps you in the rep range or the intensity range, however you want to look at it, and it lets you just kind of cycle through that. So I don't know if I remember the initial question you asked. I think I went on a little
Me
tangent there.
neither. Just kidding. No. So no, yeah, I was just saying so you don't have the temptation to like try to save yourself up for the third set of an exercise and not spend yourself too much in the first one, let's say.
No, because if you leave reps on the table in the first set, like, yeah, I mean, if you get more reps on your last set, like,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
But it doesn't actually help you, because you get, yeah, you get the bonus of getting more reps on that final set, but it gets subtracted from sandbagging the first set. So it's a good way to kind of call yourself out in that regard.
True. Yeah, that's yeah. Do you need to monitor your rest periods when you do this?
Um, yeah, if you're training in straight sets, yes. But if you're using supersets or giant sets, I find that as long as you're recovered cardiovascularly, then you're pretty much fine. So like if you're doing a giant set, say the yeah, common misconception with this is like, all right, well, your rest times vary, so your performance varies, of course. So supersets and giant sets will override that, because let's say I'm doing one of the supersets, or actually giant sets I do throughout the week, is a seated cable row followed by overhead tricep extensions followed by an upright row. So by the time I'm back to that seated cable row, I've probably already rested 4 or 5 minutes from
Mm-hmm.
just the 30-second, 40-second rest between each set and the time it takes to do another set. So whether it's a 4 minute rest or a 9 minute rest, I'm pretty much recovered. Like as long as it's
Yeah.
2.5 minutes after that, I'm not getting more reps just because I rest an extra minute. It's like if I was to rest 30 seconds and go back to it, of course, that's going to be different from 2 minutes. But after that, it kind of plateaus, keeps things consistent.
Yes. So I'm guessing you just need to sort of watch yourself a little bit, like just behaviorally. So like, okay, so I can rest anything within this range, but there is a rule that I'm not gonna stop and text someone or something, because
Yeah.
or even that wouldn't matter, because like 9 or 4, it's kind of all the same.
Yeah. I think just in a practical sense, you don't want to rest a ton between sets, especially for someone like myself, where I'm pretty sure I have like very severe undiagnosed ADHD. So um I think for myself, if I start to like go on my phone and get distracted, I can forget I'm in the gym, and that's a bit of an issue. So I also train before I go into work. So I'm on a time crunch anyways. So I
Oh,
um I kind of have to, yeah, my training, it's not, I hate to complain because it's a first world problem, but it's definitely not optimal, as ironic as that word
really?
is.
Um, and have you ever considered twice a day training? Just curiosity, out of
I
curiosity.
have, yeah, I tried it very briefly in the past. It was actually the last time I tried it was when I first started lifting, because I was just addicted to the gym. I
Mhm.
just absolutely loved it. It was my home. Like I remember being at work when I was 17, when I first got my gym membership, and I worked from 8 to 2 at this little market, and I was just sitting there like, there was a chef I was buddies with that would just cook me up meals because I was like bulking or whatever. And I would just
Nice.
all day I would just be excited to go to the gym. Is, yeah, fun time. So back then, yeah, I would try going to the gym a couple times a day, but then I kind of understood programming enough at the start to where I was like, there's really no benefit to it, because even if I train one muscle in the morning and one muscle at night, or two muscles in the morning, two muscles at night, like one, I could just combine them. And then two, it's like, yeah, I can get ahead as much as I want, but I still need that day rest before going to train another muscle group. So there's only so much I can do in
Mm-hmm.
that hard. And that was obviously, that's not to say you can't train a muscle every day, but at least in my mindset when I was doing that, um, I didn't think you could train a muscle every day. And I'm still somewhat skeptical about it. Like I don't like to train that way. Not that I've experimented enough with it, but yeah, those are
Yeah.
kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, it's I can tell you that it has it's a funny upside if you ever wanted to do like a really crazy diet down to some really shredded body fat. It's kind of nice because it just keeps you out of the house, and while you're there, you definitely cannot eat, or you're at least you're not as likely to do so. So that's one thing, and then it just distracts you, so you're not focused on how hungry you are. So that's I mean, yeah, I realize how messed up it must sound to someone who is not like intimately into this whole lifting world. But other than that, it's definitely not a requirement. Other than actually, this is one thing I didn't ask you. Like, do you have a number of total sets or exercises that you like to do in a given session?
Not really, because I think this is where there's a little bit more nuance to the volume and total exercises per lift session. So like there's sometimes where I'll have 10 lifts, but if two of those lifts are like a forearm roller, and one of them's like a stretched wrist curl, and one of them's like one set of easy bar skull crushers. It's like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't take that much time. And two, in terms of like systemic fatigue and recovery, it just doesn't do that much. But if I'm doing like a bunch of compound lifts for bigger muscle groups, yeah, I mean, it's tough to go past maybe five or six of those. I don't even go that high now for like fatiguing like big hitter lifts.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like isolation and lifts that like less fatigue and compound lifts, so something like a lat pull down or something like that, um, you can kind of just do as much as you need. Like, yeah, it might take a little bit longer, but the recovery is a little bit quicker in the short term, like in the session, and long term between sessions. Um, that you can kind of just do as much as you need or want that works for you.
Right, right, right. So yeah, so what were we talking about with before I asked you about the twice a day training? It was
Progressions and
progression.
rep goal system and
Yes. So what do you think about my preferred method, which I really just look at the first set for the most part, for as long as I can get away with that. So it's you have a rep target, let's say it's 12 or whatever, and it's like, okay, once you hit 12, you add weight. Next time, if you lose reps, just build them back up over the next couple of sessions. Then you go higher again in weight. And then subsequent sets, it's kind of like, yeah. So in my mind, this can be a positive or a negative depending on the person. If someone is like really dedicated to training and they don't do like a lot of sets where you are more likely to lose focus, you just, proximity to failure should be there. You pay attention to technique, but it doesn't influence what you do in those sets, doesn't influence whether you can go heavier or not in the next session. So what do you think about that?
I love it. I do. So I would call that a variation of like a dynamic double progression. I actually use that. And I recommend that for a lot of isolation type lifts, or lifts that are lifts where you're training to muscular failure and not necessarily technical failure. So you take something like, say, an overhead tricep extension with a cable, where you're probably going to do some partials or cheat reps or whatever towards the end of the set. That's something where on the first set, say you're doing 3 sets, it probably makes sense to base your progressions off of how the first set goes. I mean, in terms of total performance, if you're doing well on the first set, you're gonna do better on your next sets. Even if your next sets match what you did previously, your first set's still better. So that is progression. But you look at the way you're training that lift. One, you don't have to track every set. Just tracking one set, I think, is sufficient for a lot of lifts. And two, it can actually get in the way sometimes when you're tracking every single set like that, because it almost makes you want to take isolation lifts that should be probably trained to muscular failure to technical failure. And you might be leaving some gains on the table, not training that lift hard enough. The one hack to get around this is to use a mechanical drop set. So you can do as many clean reps as you can of that overhead tricep extension, and then stop counting your reps there, and then just do either cheats or partials to take it to muscular failure and just not count those at all.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's your So like your end point to a set on isolation lifts. So do you do them until like you literally like fail mid rep, or like you grind out that very last, maybe slightly broken down form and you still grind it out and then you stop?
It depends on the lift. So a lot of the time I don't actually fail. I take it to 0 reps in reserve, which is something that for someone like me or you, like where we just, not to toot our own horns, but we've been training
Feel
for
free to.
long enough to, yeah. So yeah, we're great lifters. No, I'm kidding, but we are pretty good lifters. We have experience. So with some experience, you can tell you just know your proximity to failure pretty well. Are there going to be errors every now and then? Sure. But if you take it to 0 reps in reserve, you kind of know where that is. And then, yeah, you'll just take it to whatever advanced technique you want to, or you'll just kind of stop the set there. So in my own training, I'm doing some lifts, especially forearms and triceps. I do tend to take those beyond failure. For something like biceps, I found that it doesn't actually help that much. Um, I think because it's easier to grind on your reps, I find that with something like an overhead tricep extension, it's like when you're done, like you're done. You're not getting any more reps unless you use a decent amount of cheat. But with bicep curls, that last rep can be such a slow grinder where it's like at that point, you don't quite need that advanced technique as much as you would on something like a tricep
Mm-hmm.
overhead extension.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's, to be honest, I just hate, so biceps training. I like training triceps. Actually, I got it's an acquired taste that like now I feel like I enjoy it, especially because I could figure out what those movements are where my elbows just don't hurt, which was pretty difficult. On biceps, so actually it's not necessarily that anything hurts. It's more like, it's just that it's kind of like the quads, in that like I need a surprising amount of warming up until I really feel like I'm ready to really push myself on these bicep movements. Because up until then, it just feels like this awkward, rigid, cold like structure here, this whole like elbow crease area. So I
Huh.
try to curl and it's just like, oh man, like it's so awkward.
Huh. What are you typically doing for your arm training now? Like especially for triceps, like what are you typically doing there? Especially, yeah, if you're someone that's kind of prone to elbow pain, like what do you find works?
So very oddly enough, I actually do a lot of overhead extensions at this point, which would have been unimaginable earlier on, because anytime I did it, it flared the hell out of my elbows. But I just found that the key is just to flare the elbows out enough. So not tuck them in like this. Like, so this, even if I did it now without any weights in my hand, it probably would start hurting. If I flare it out like this, and then kind of just do it controlled enough so that like I don't fully let it collapse into this complete like maximal flexion angle, but like go like kind of like here, then it actually I can do a ton of it. So I do like at least like 10 sets a week or something like that of just that. And then the other one would be so I started doing these push downs with a longer, you can do it with like a double rope attachment, or I just attach something to the end of the rope, and like that way I can like kind of lean forward. So at this but or well at the maximal elbow flexion angle that you would get during the movement, the rope is kind of like pulling me up, so there's actually a fair amount of tension on the triceps in the most stretched position here. And then I can also like very nicely flare the elbows out. So it really like it seems like to me that's the biggest key, is to just kind of follow that movement pattern of the elbow that it prefers. Because like, I mean, I don't know how it is for you, but if I tuck my elbows in and I do a push down movement, like it wants to move outward. So if I tuck it in, there's just a lot of weird like torque type force on my elbows, which just pisses them off.
Yeah, so I think I relate to that in a somewhat similar way. For me, it's not really pain. The only time I feel elbow pain is if I do like skull crushes to the forehead, which I just don't think it's a good lift anymore.
Mm,
But in terms of mobility, I 100% agree with you. It's just for me, it's a mobility issue, not an elbow pain thing. So
uh-huh.
yeah, with the overhead extensions, I used to do them with an easy curl bar, and my elbows would be parallel. I don't have the mobility because this flannel isn't stretchy, but elbow above the head, parallel like this, and pressing up. And it's like, unless I had like a stationary seated bench where I could like really lean back to let the weight just pull my elbows up and keep them locked in that position, I I couldn't I didn't get that much out of that movement. And that's where I wrote off movements like cable overhead extensions and stuff like that for so long, because I was like, how the hell do you even get into that position? I just didn't get it.
Mm,
Um, and then I found that, yeah, when you flare your elbows out to the side, it's not, it doesn't seem like it should work, but it just does. So yeah, I think it's just the plane of motion that you work in. I think when your plane of motion can kind of line up with how your shoulder and your scapula start to want to move naturally, that's where you're just in your natural position. And it just something feels right about it. Like it doesn't look like it should be right, but it technically is.
yeah. Yeah. I think this is one of those things, a little bit like the noble lower body training, that like in bodybuilding and in lifting, we just get attached mentally to certain like aesthetics or the aesthetic aspect of certain lifts, and like tucked elbow, like there just seems to be something proper about that. Like flared elbows just seems to be something like normie-esque about that. So like, yeah, like doing tricep extensions like this, like no, like this tucked
Yeah,
elbows, like this
it's
is,
square. It's perfect. Yeah.
yes,
That's what
yeah.
it is.
Yeah, it's like, with never mind that it hurts your elbow like hell. Like so yeah, and then with biceps, yeah, with that one. So for me also, like the bit of elbow flare. So that's another thing. Like I never did bilateral cable curls with the cable resistance coming from behind me, because then you gotta flare your elbows a little bit, because I mean, how the hell are you gonna tuck it, right? Because the two pulleys are a little bit out wide. um but when I started doing it, it was like, holy shit, like if I move my elbows kind of diagonally like this actually feels pretty good. And otherwise, like, I always started getting these really weird it was more like bicep tendon pain, to be honest, not so much elbow pain. And so that's one key. And to me also, just having a bit of like internal rotation at the bottom. So also with a preacher curl, so like I will kind of go down and rotate like this and then come back like this. So I always do it with a dumbbell, or I guess with like a very thumbless grip. I could do it with an easy bar. um so yeah, what about you?
Yeah, as far as tricep training, my staples are JM press, which is just, and this is where I think part of it's probably genetic, part of it's probably just I tend to be a cautious person physically, and part of it's just I think it's the way I trained, especially when I first started lifting, where I trained every muscle group and I trained it hard and properly and frequently. So I built up a good base to avoid nagging pains and injuries. So I do think part of that's probably genetic too, or I'm just a little bit more injury resistant. Um, but I'm able to just get a ridiculous stretch in the JM press and be perfectly fine. So I did ease into that. I didn't just go for 135 pounds full range of motion touching my neck on the first rep. I started light and eased into a bigger stretch, but that's been a staple, especially in developing the lateral head. That has been one of the more significant lifts in building up my arms over the past 4 or 5 months. Um, Overhead extensions with the cable with the flared elbows to get that full stretch. I think the secret is one, getting the big stretch on the triceps, which I never did before. I was just one of those stop at 90-degree bros,
Mm-hmm.
but also placing the most tension on your triceps in the stretch position. It's just a lethal combo. So when you have something like a JM press to smoke the lateral head under that tension in that stretch position, it's pretty unreal. Same with the overhead extensions, where you have maybe not the most tension in that stretch position, but the entire range of motion is in a stretched tricep. Your long head stretched out when you're overhead like that. So those have been a solid duo for me. And I just incorporated a similar push down to what you were actually talking about with the longer ropes. The way
Mhm.
that my cable set up, try and show you real quick, but you can see it's two separate attachments there. So I don't necessarily need a rope since it's not one cable. So I can actually kind of mimic that long rope push down
Mm.
where, yeah, I just kind of lean over a little bit and just let them come up towards my chest and just push down like that. I just tried that for the first time earlier this week, actually, and I loved it. So that's going to be a staple. It's almost like it kind of similar to a JM press in terms of where the tension is and the
Yep.
lateral head
It is.
actually. But yeah, as far as biceps, it's very straightforward. It's not nearly as like fancy. It's just close grip easy bar curls, dead stop easy bar curls, and dead stop barbell curls. The dead stop's been fun. I just enjoy training that way.
Yeah, it's so on the tricep stuff, like I actually tried that like last week as well, and also really liked it. So with the two cables, honestly, the only problem I have with that is that I'm just scared that I'm gonna rip the end of the cable because I'm grabbing the cable itself. So I'm kind of holding onto that little ball at the end of the cable. So I'm just like, man, if I rip this thing off and I can say goodbye for a while to my functional trainer, I'm gonna be very upset.
Yeah.
So that's why I was kind of sticking with the rope instead. Um, and yeah, like the yeah, with biceps, I think that prolonged, so that mechanical drop set thing, I actually prefer that a lot more than grinding through that sticking point in a bicep curl, because like especially these movements that are the hardest at the top, or basically at the most contracted position, like in those ones I just hate that grinding point, because like it's sort of, it never ends. There's always like a little bit more effort and like slight modification to the execution that you could do, which would kind of get you another few centimeters into the set or into the repetition. I just hate it, and I cannot breathe in the meantime. So it's like, okay, you know what, that's it, I'll just do like some partials at the end or something like that to really push myself close to failure.
How
So
I feel with rows, man. Yeah, it's the same thing. Like that's the reason why I'm not the biggest fan of like a seated cable row, because it's like, oh, the first half the movement's very easy, and then you get halfway through and you're just stuck. Nothing you can really do about it.
yeah. Well, man, how about we do this? Like, I think we could call it here because like it's been 2 hours, and maybe sometime in the near future, I will attempt to get you back on, and then we can chat a little bit more about like progression, like strength standards. Like there are like some really nice, juicy topics that
But
I
yeah,
think we could have a fun combo on.
I agree.
Cool beans, man. Then I really, really do appreciate. So, I mean, I knew as soon as I said it that no, it's not gonna be 2 hours. I knew it that it's gonna be, but I couldn't tell you that at the time, right?
I planned on 2 hours, so it works perfectly for me.
Yeah. No,
And
I
yeah,
appreciate
I
it a
I
lot.
chose the time too, so this is the time that's convenient for me, right? So I do appreciate
Awesome.
you having me on, man. It's a fun talk, and I can talk training forever, so this stuff's cool.
Yeah. No, it was a really cool combo. So I enjoyed it, and thanks a lot for your time. And yeah, just please let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So Basement Bodybuilding on YouTube and Basement Bodybuilding on Instagram. I usually just post like if I have some kind of cool tip that's not worthy of a YouTube video, I'll probably post it on Instagram. You'll see a couple like cut transformations or bulk transformations, kind of just stuff like that on Instagram. Nothing crazy, but if you want the good stuff, it's all on the YouTube.
Awesomeness. We'll link to all of that. So yeah, Landon, Basement. Thanks a lot for your time. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So not end meeting.